The night air in Doha was shattered by an Israeli airstrike, a sudden eruption of violence that broke the city's usual calm and sent shockwaves through the region. The strike targeted a residential building in the heart of the Qatari capital, a place once considered untouchable, now marked by chaos and fear. Its intended target was the Hamas negotiating team, who were in Doha to review a US-brokered ceasefire proposal, ironically a mission of peace interrupted by violence. The assassination attempt ultimately failed, but the message was unmistakable. Israel's war on Hamas would not be confined by borders, diplomatic protocols, or international expectations. Qatar, a key US ally and host to the region's largest American military base, had always been a neutral ground for mediation, a rare safe haven for dialogue in a turbulent region. By striking in Doha, Israel signaled a willingness to act unilaterally, even at the risk of alienating Washington and jeopardizing its most crucial alliances. The world watched in disbelief as the established rules of international relations were upended, and the sanctity of diplomatic spaces was called into question. The attack, coming just as hope for a ceasefire emerged, was a political earthquake, its tremors felt in capitals far beyond the Middle East. It tested alliances, challenged international law, and put the US's influence in a region it has long sought to stabilize under intense scrutiny. The shockwaves were immediate and profound, violating the principle of safe zones for diplomacy and raising urgent questions about the future of negotiations and peace efforts. The strike became a flashpoint for heated debates on sovereignty, targeted assassinations, and the ever-present risk of a wider regional conflict spiraling out of control. A line had been crossed in Qatar, and from this moment forward, the Middle East would never be the same. The world now faced a new and uncertain reality. The Israeli strike missed its primary targets but killed 5 Hamas members, underscoring the operation's deadly reach. The attack took place in a residential compound, drawing global condemnation for endangering civilians in a densely populated city. Doha's image as a stable, secure hub was shattered overnight. The explosion sent a chilling message. No capital was truly safe from the conflict's reach. Concerns for the safety of expatriates, diplomats, and citizens surged as the war's brutality arrived at the heart of peace talks. Israel emphasized its precision, while Hamas and allies decried the reckless endangerment of civilians. Human rights groups demanded investigations, questioning the legality and humanitarian cost of the strike. The debate over casualties highlighted a painful truth. In this conflict, the cost is always measured in human lives. The world was forced to confront a war that refused to be contained. Even in supposed safe havens, the boundaries between war and peace had vanished. Qatar's response was swift and furious, condemning the Israeli strike as a violation of sovereignty and a betrayal of its role as mediator. Arab nations rallied in solidarity, framing the attack as an assault on the region's diplomatic efforts. International leaders and the UN called for de-escalation, warning of dangerous precedents. Human rights groups questioned the legality of targeted assassinations in a neutral country. Israel faced intense diplomatic isolation, complicating US efforts to maintain a united front. The Arab and Islamic world's unified response signaled hardening positions and waning patience. BRICS nations and the global south saw the strike as another example of Western-backed unilateralism. The chorus of condemnation revealed shifting geopolitical tides and a challenge to Washington's authority. In the White House, the Doha strike landed like a political grenade, sending shockwaves through the corridors of power. The atmosphere was tense as officials scrambled to assess the fallout and anticipate the world's reaction. President Trump's response was one of calculated ambiguity. A terse, carefully worded statement that reaffirmed Israel's right to self-defense, but stopped short of any direct condemnation or explicit support for the strike itself. Behind the scenes, US officials scrambled to reassure Qatar, insisting they had no prior knowledge of the operation, and promising to do everything possible to prevent a repeat. Diplomatic channels buzzed with urgent calls and messages, as Washington tried to contain the diplomatic fallout. The administration walked a tightrope, offering public support for Israel to appease domestic audiences, while simultaneously engaging in private damage control with anxious Arab allies, hoping to maintain fragile regional relationships. Trump's silence was strategic, a deliberate move to avoid a public rebuke or endorsement that could alienate key constituencies at home and abroad. Every word, or lack thereof, was weighed for its potential impact. Critics saw this as a sign of waning American influence and the limits of US power in a rapidly shifting multipolar world. The administration's hesitance was interpreted as uncertainty, fueling debate among analysts. The incident exposed cracks in Washington's ability to restrain its allies, highlighting the growing challenges of managing complex international relationships. As Russia and China stepped into the diplomatic vacuum left by America's muted response, the world watched as U.S. sway appeared to diminish, and new power brokers emerged on the global stage. The muted response underscored a new reality. The U.S. could no longer dictate events in the Middle East as it once did, and regional actors were quick to notice the shift. The region's key players were recalibrating their strategies, sensing the shift in power dynamics and preparing for a future where American leadership was no longer guaranteed. The old order was slipping away, replaced by uncertainty and a new, unpredictable balance of power. Qatar responded to the strike not with retreat, but with a diplomatic offensive, rallying Arab and Islamic nations. The attack united previously divided Gulf states, leading to a summit and a joint declaration condemning Israel and calling for international action. Qatar's efforts extended to the BRICS bloc, finding support among Russia, China, and India for a more multipolar approach to Middle East security. The push for a UN Security Council resolution, though likely to face a U.S. veto, was a strategic move to isolate Washington and Israel. Qatar transformed vulnerability into diplomatic strength, repositioning itself as a central leader in a newly energized Arab bloc. The incident exposed the failures of the US-led security architecture and accelerated calls for a new regional order. The world saw a shift. The old dynamics were no longer tenable. Qatar's gambit had changed the game. As diplomatic fallout from Doha intensified, Israel launched airstrikes on Yemen's Hodeidah port, targeting Houthi assets. The port, Yemen's main humanitarian lifeline, was devastated, dozens killed, infrastructure in flames. Israel claimed self-defense, but warnings did little to prevent tragedy in a country already ravaged by war. Houthi leaders vowed retaliation, escalating the conflict and threatening regional stability. The Red Sea became a war zone, disrupting global trade and raising fears of a broader confrontation. The strikes marked a direct state-on-state escalation, drawing Iran-backed groups into sharper opposition. Israel's willingness to strike anywhere risked pulling Iran further into the conflict. The specter of full-scale regional war loomed closer than ever. The Doha strike dealt a fatal blow to fragile ceasefire and hostage negotiations. For Hamas, the assassination attempt was the ultimate act of bad faith, killing trust at the negotiating table. The US-backed proposal collapsed instantly. How could talks continue when negotiators were targeted? Israeli hostage families desperate for a deal saw their hopes dashed and protested their government's gamble. Mediators from the US, Qatar, and Egypt watched months of diplomacy unravel overnight. The attack poisoned future negotiations, making neutral ground a thing of the past. With talks dead, both sides doubled down on military action, and the conflict spread to Yemen. The hope for a ceasefire was replaced by the grim reality of widening war. The Doha strike showed how quickly peace can be shattered by a single act of violence. Only destruction remained in its wake. The Israeli strikes in Qatar and Yemen were seismic events, exposing the cracks in the old regional order. These attacks sent shockwaves through capitals across the Middle East, shattering any lingering sense of predictability and stability that had defined the region for decades. The Doha attack challenged the unwritten rules of Middle Eastern diplomacy and signaled Israel's willingness to defy even its superpower patron. For many, it was a moment that redefined the boundaries of acceptable action, forcing diplomats and leaders to reconsider their assumptions about deterrence and alliances. American authority eroded, creating a dangerous power vacuum and a more volatile region. The absence of a clear arbiter left old rivalries unchecked, and new actors began to assert themselves with unprecedented boldness. The conflict's expansion into Yemen and the Red Sea dragged the world into a confrontation once thought containable. What began as a regional crisis now threatened to spiral into a global conflict, with shipping lanes and vital resources at risk. The response from Washington, the assertive diplomacy of Qatar, and the rise of BRICS highlighted a profound shift in global power. New voices demanded a seat at the table, and old alliances were tested as never before. A multipolar world was no longer theoretical, it was reality. The balance of power was shifting before the world's eyes, with new coalitions emerging to fill the void left by a retreating America. New alliances formed, with Russia and China deepening their involvement and Arab nations uniting as never before. These partnerships brought fresh opportunities and new dangers as the region's future was rewritten in real time. The Doha strike may be remembered as the moment U.S. hegemony in the Middle East ended. It marked a turning point, a rupture in the old order that had shaped the region for generations. As of September 18, 2025, the region's future hangs in the balance, with the risk of catastrophic war terrifyingly high. Every decision now carries enormous consequences, and the world watches with bated breath. The strikes shattered the illusion of stability and broke the framework for peace. Decades of careful negotiation and fragile truces were swept away in a matter of hours. The day U.S. power cracked, the future of the Middle East became a question for everyone. In this new era, uncertainty reigns, and the path forward remains as unpredictable as ever.